and I appreciate him coming on. Jerry Peterman, FukushimaUpdateReport.com. He began his professional engineering career in TV radio in the 1960s, and he left television and radio to begin a 14-year career in nuclear physics. And he invented the first microcomputer, MicroLED 1, changed the standards for lead-in paint detection, lead-in paint detection, the prevention of childhood lead poisoning. He worked to craft and lead the paint health standards legislation. The owner of his own nuclear laboratory, Warrington Labs, located 4 miles north of, I'm not going to go over the entire stuff that he's done. He served 14 years as state Texas licensed radiation safety officer and health security officer. I'm not going to go over it all. But he comes on with us today to, this is a short segment, long segment coming up, to break down really how bad Fukushima is with all the wreckage now arriving on the West Coast, where he thinks it's all going, the other leaking reactors all over the world. It's like the government doesn't care anymore. They just there's no standards. I mean, here's an example of this, and we're going to him. I've got 2 articles here. Obama's ambassador to Norway knows nothing about Norway, and then brags about how he knows nothing about Norway. And there's a video of this, nominee to be next ambassador to China, quote, "I'm no real expert on China." I mean, you're supposed to hire people that have lived their whole lives living there, studying it. I mean, and that's what the British defense expert said last week. He said, these people basically know nothing up there. They just know gangster stuff. And that's what I'm saying. They're in control, but they do not know what they're doing. And I think that's part of the problem with this elite, is that just like Rome and other civilizations that became corrupt, in 410, as the Germans and the Vandals were approaching, when they finally destroyed Rome forever, they said, you know, the barbarians have run over our military. They're 40 miles away. And they said, bring in more slave girls. Throw more people to the lions. And they said, they're going to kill everybody. You've got to organize some emergency, defend the city. They just couldn't do it. They were too busy throwing their political enemies to lions. And I'm telling you, folks, that's where we are. 3 minutes till break. I want to go to our guest, Jerry Peterman. Jerry, what is the state, as somebody who's watched it like nobody else, of Fukushima? What are we really facing?
Denial, denial, denial. Let's spend more money on the Olympics than taking care of our own people. Let's have absolutely no sense of humanity. We don't care about our own kids. Even our own government changed the radiation level acceptability when it started showing up on the shores a few weeks after it happened. I come back to what was said during the McCarthy era, when they asked Senator McCarthy, have you no shame? These people have none.
How bad's the radiation? I know you track all the radiation detectors in the nation that are hooked into the internet.
It's bad. It's going to cause some deaths in the United States over a long period of time. We have a situation where 3 out of the 4, for certain 3 out of the 4 reactors have experienced the China syndrome kind of thing, where the cores have melted down through the base concrete in the buildings. The explosions were so great that some of the core material was thrown as much as 2 kilometers away. That material has gotten in the ocean. That material has been plowed under by bulldozers. It's a willy-nilly kind of a effort out in the Fukushima area. Seemed to be without regard to the humanity of the Japanese people. Then they go further by passing laws saying you can't even talk about it. But we're going to have the Olympics.
That's right. As you know, 2 weeks ago, they passed a martial law edict where you can't talk about the radiation levels in Japan. And, of course, it's the mafia openly running Japan. It's the same deal. It's mafia government. And these mafia people, whether they be in the U.S. or Japan, they just think their baloney trumps reality. The facts are in. The studies are legion. Sodium fluoride and other members of the fluorine family that are added to Western water supplies are devastating the health and cognitive ability of the people that drink it. So the question is, why are the social engineers adding it to the water? Simple. Dumb down the host population that the parasitic technocracy is feeding on. We developed Fluoride Shield to be the highest quality, highest standards because I use it every day and my family uses it every single day. Let's take a closer look at the ingredients that make up this special proprietary formula. Tamarind has been celebrated for its ability to immobilize toxic fluoride residues, while zeolites have a long history of attracting and holding toxic compounds. Enter fulvic acid, an excellent cleansing agent. Then we added the highest quality shilajit, a rare compound that is collected from the high mountains of the Himalayas. We topped it all off with the powerhouse herb cilantro that is intended to mobilize fluoride and other dangerous compounds for removal from the body. And the final touch to energize this formula is our proprietary nascent iodine. And as always, consult your physician as well because that is important. And finally, Fluoride Shield, Survival Shield, and all the products at InfoWarsLife.com grew out of my quest to try to find the very best compounds from God's cornucopia to protect myself and my family. And from our research, I believe we are bringing you the best, highest quality products. And you have that commitment from Alex Jones and the entire InfoWars crew. Dr. Bob Bowman, who died last year, a good friend of mine, former head of the Star Wars program, that's basically what he said. He said it's like Chernobyl. You'll just see an increase in cancers across the board, unattributable to that. And, he said millions will probably end up dying, of cancers down the road, but we'll never know. And the Northern Hemisphere gets more and more radioactive. My bigger issue is that they just don't seem to care now, and there's more and more of these disasters happening. But you were getting into, there are groups out there that put out sensational stuff that isn't really true that the media can then focus in on. But then you get like 14 times what it's supposed to be in San Francisco, and the media says, well, that's true, but it's not a big deal. And as you said, the EPA raises the levels of what they say is safe. So, that's my big issue, and I want to break down Fukushima with you, but go ahead and make your point. The break ran into the satellite, cutting in, and it was, you were saying something like, you think it might be disinfo on purpose, saying people can fry eggs on the beach.
I think that there's just too much of the garbage and the silliness about we're all going to fry next week. And then when somebody actually comes out and does an expose on this, like, for example, your team goes out there and finds active levels of material on the beach, then you're chunked into the category of the same loons that put out bogus garbage. And I can't help but wonder if bogus garbage was put out there so that your good work would be laughed at or whatever, or not taken seriously.
Now, I could ask the questions here, but I want to give you the floor to talk about your research and where you think we really are.
I think we are given right now a golden opportunity to see the future. I think Fukushima is an example of what could happen many times over, even in our own country, maybe not from a tsunami, but we have a large number of those plants that were manufactured. They're identical. The reactors are identical to the ones that were installed at Fukushima. And I think by understanding that if we had a coronal mass ejection or something like that, we'd have huge numbers of reactors that would begin to operate exactly like Fukushima. The only difference is, in most cases in this country, we have a whole lot more control rods, spent rods at each site than Fukushima has. That's hard to believe, but that's a fact. And so it gets kind of scary. We also have at least 6 that I know of, that may be as high as 20 that are on fault lines in this country. Fukushima's a lesson, and I'm afraid everybody's playing at recess and they're not listening to the lesson. We have a situation in Japan that the wind will change and the material will drift over the rest of the whole island. And you can go to Tokyo and get high readings But the government's saying, oh, no, everything's fine. Hey, I'm going to eat some of this seafood. Prime Minister Abe's going out and eating seafood. I'll bet he is.
Amazing. You've had so many of the TEPCO people that were there now die, and you've got cover-ups going on. I agree with you, though. For me, Fukushima is a golden opportunity to try to educate myself and others. But it's also an education in how governments and corporations, again, are delusional now.
Absolutely. We're looking at a corporation that has no clue about to do anything. As Gunderson said, I think it was on Joyce Riley's show, said something about these people are operators. They're not engineers. They haven't got a clue. They know how to operate a system once it's designed and put in. But beyond that, they're only operators. And now we don't have enough people to operate the facilities. So what do? They go find homeless people on the streets of the major cities, and they're considered disposable people. They give them a nice hot meal, a fancy white suit, and tell them they're going to do something really important for their country. Well, what Japanese person in that society wouldn't be honored to do something for their country? They don't even understand that they're going to die.
So the government that's dishonorable uses the honor of its good people against the people.
Yes, of course they do. That's why nobody, well, I won't say nobody, but there's very few people marching in the streets demanding, why is my little daughter or my son now have some kind of lesions on the thyroid? You've got a huge number of children in the whole country that are showing signs of thyroid, future thyroid cancer. At least in the Chernobyl situation, Poland, for example, went out and immediately handed out the iodine, and virtually no person ever came down with thyroid cancer.
I had the Navy lieutenant on yesterday, and they filed suit, as you know, against TEPCO with his lawyer, who's in a wheelchair and on a catheter now. And they've got a whole bunch of people it's happening to. Well, you heard it good for new listeners. They didn't even give the people, except the pilots that were flying over, or if you were on the deck, they didn't give them iodine, even though they had it on the Ronald Reagan. That's
correct. Absolutely. Again, the attitude of, they're disposable people. I believe you made the comment, well, why wouldn't they, somebody said, why don't they use monkeys? People cost less. Wasn't that something that was on your program?
Yes, that's something my dad was told by a research scientist.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the attitude that TEPCO had. TEPCO just lost their chairman because he floated a trial balloon to try to raise a lot more money for this project by taxing or raising the rates on the ratepayers so that their profits would remain high. And finally, it got out, so he had to resign. So they had to replace that particular chairman. That happened 2.5, 3 weeks ago.
Well, you've been studying reactors for decades as an engineer and a licensed radiation safety officer and health officer. What would you do to clean up the nuclear industry? What's your view on nuclear power?
A long time ago, I was like you. I thought it was a good idea. I could see how it could be safely operated. We used to talk about putting the material in the containment in Yucca Flats and burying it. But the Defense Department decided to buy all the old rods and turn them into weapons and to depleted uranium weapons. So now we've dumped 40,000 tons of that material on the Middle East, and that's that. The nuclear power industry is the most dangerous thing we've ever done in the history of the world. Because if you had one, or let me ask you this. Do you remember that idiotic program on public television that said After Man? And there were deer running around.
Yes.
And, it's just going to be so great. Well, here's the scenario. If you have a coronal mass ejection, like the Carrington event in 1858, 59, where all the electronics fry on this planet, the first thing you would have is all of the buildings, which now have wire in them, catch on fire. So you're standing around choking to death in the dark. 6 weeks later, all of the 711 nuclear power plants that we have would go critical. So we're one Carrington event from mass extinction of every living thing on this planet. And I think Einstein said it well. He said it's a hell of a way to boil water. And I says, what do you mean by that? And I said, okay, I'm going to boil water in a bucket out in the backyard. In a year, you can find the ashes. In 10 years, you can't. In 100 years, you can't. In 1,000, in 10,000. But if I boil equivalent amount of water with the uranium material that they're using now, 4.5 billion years from now, I can find the waste of when I boiled water for a single day. Now, somebody is nuts.
That's right. The more you study the nuclear power industry, the more you realize they are a menace. And again, they had DU back in the 50s. They wouldn't allow it to be used till 1990. There's a fundamental insanity by the people running the social engineering and the decision-making process. And
I think, Alex, we have people now who I genuinely believe, like you're talking about the people say they sold their soul. I think we're dealing with leaders who have no soul. We're dealing with people, corporations have no soul. I mean, it's supposed to be under the law. That's a person. Well, that's a soulless person. So if you're working for a corporation like TEPCO, it has no soul, and the people are there to maintain the corporation. So they're working for a soulless entity, and there isn't any conscience in a corporation unless they're good people. Well, we found out there are very few good people there. They're willing to use the poor and the uneducated, and they're willing to sacrifice their own children, the next generation, and possibly a lot more people if they come over there for the Olympics. Now, who are these people? What right do they have to do that?
I think it's about the fact that they don't have the right, and they are vandalizing the planet, the species, yes, the genetic genome of the entire biosphere. They come to kill, steal, and destroy. I've only read in history in all cultures about one entity, whether it be fiction or real, who behaves like this, and he has a name. It's Lucifer, Satan, the devil. I mean, that's really what I think it comes down to.
Absolutely. Let me tell you what these people, this is the thing that I just have to laugh in irony. These people say, well, it's not so bad. There's just a little bit in the water, blah, 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 blah. Yes, but it's a gift that keeps on giving for a minimum of another 4 to 6 generations. There's no control of this thing. Now, let's assume for just a moment I'm Harry Potter and I can make all the radiation go away in the whole world, even Fukushima. I'm sorry, but we still have something that will last forever, and that is the genetic damage and mutations that will be transmitted from now on in every species in the ocean that has just a little bit or a lot. There are tiny mutations. We eat that stuff, there are tiny mutations in us. It's going to permeate the planet. That those little mutations, even if no more radiation were present, that it damages the ecosystem, the genome of the entire planet. So a little is just as deadly as a lot.
And by the way, you're also an author. We could talk about that. But going back here, looking at this, when you talked about these events that happened over 100 years ago when they had a mass coronal ejection from the sun that caused telegraph wires all over the country to catch on fire and burn down houses, and in Europe, and of course now there's conservatively thousands of times, if not, I don't know, millions of times, I don't know the number of wiring, nobody knows it, everywhere. And the Congress has done studies, as you know, admitting that they need to harden the power plants and everything, and admitting all of the nuclear power plants within 6 weeks, if we have one of these, will blow up. And then that's an end to this wonderful world without man, because that is going to irrevocably kill almost everything on the surface of the planet. I mean, this is madness, and they did all the studies before they approved nuclear power in the 40s and 50s. They know all this, and again, they just don't even care. It's crazy land.
They don't care. Alex, you know, even if we didn't have the nuclear power, we would all end up dying in the dark, because we wired every building on this planet virtually that is anything above a Hubble with wire. And if we get a Carrington event, all that wire melts, catches those buildings on fire. And if you get hundreds of millions of buildings on this planet on fire, and there is no way to operate any vehicles, no water, nothing pumps. The amount of toxins in the atmosphere make Krakatoa and those kind of events look like a birthday party.
So you're talking about a new ice age. It'll put all the smoke into the air. It'll cool the Earth down. Yeah. And then we will all freeze in a planetary-wide ice age.
Yes, and that would happen nowadays. If the same Carrington event happened, we would end up with a forced ice age.
By the way, that's 100% MIT, Stanford research told Congress a decade ago, last year. All the scientists are worried about this. They're not hardening anything. Folks, if you don't know what we're talking about, it's a nature-made, sun-made mass EMP, to put it in layman's terms. Tell folks what a Carrington event is.
In 1858 and 1859, there were very few wires strung across the world, and basically the only wires that existed at that time were telegraph systems. A Carrington event is a large ejection of charged particles from the sun, a huge belch, if you will, greater than any solar flare you've ever even thought of seeing. Now, the solar flare doesn't reach the Earth. It's not a thing that'll burn the Earth. But those charged particles leave the sun at over 1 million miles an hour. And you're looking at 93 minutes later, the Earth is hit with massive amounts of charged particles. Those particles then have a magnetic effect on any kind of metal. And the longer the metal, the quicker and the faster it is that it will absorb the energy. It actually burned people's faces who were wearing glasses in certain parts of the world where they had the wire-rimmed glasses, and they became hot. And it didn't melt on their face because it wasn't long, the wires weren't long enough. But when you have a web inside your home, those wires are long enough, and there's no hardening. You can go through and pretend that you can harden a nuclear power plant, or you can harden the grid, or whatever. No, as long as the wire is exposed to the sun, there's no hardening to it. We have built something out on the edge of a limb near a variable star. We paid no attention. We didn't learn the lesson.
We've built a time bomb, a huge bomb with a big fuse right up by a big campfire.
We did, and then we went out and got an entire 500,000 trailer truckloads of TNT and pulled it up to the fire. First, we built the bomb with wiring all of our homes, and then we went out and built all the nuclear power plants that can't afford to not be cooled. It's insanity. It's insanity for people. I think it was just greed. Well, I don't care about the next generation. As I said, a corporation is a soulless entity.
Well, sir, I want to get you back up for an extended hour-long special transmission on the nightly news sometimes. FukushimaUpdateReport.com for the straight dope on what's going on with Fukushima. Jerry Peterman. Ask yourselves, what are you doing in this time of great challenge? What are you doing to unlock minds?